Hi everyone, this is your video over the nitrogen cycle. So remember, it's important in discussing these cycles that we remember that Earth is an open system. We have an exchange of energy and matter with space around us. However, Earth doesn't receive a ton of matter from space, right? We don't get enough asteroids or meteorites or anything like that to replenish all of the chemicals that we use just in our day-to-day lives. And so, even though we have that exchange there, energy is what we most freely exchange. And that matter needs to be replenished here on Earth, and so that happens by way of biogeochemical cycles. Okay, and remember, biogeochemical cycles involve the living biosphere, the geologic biosphere, right, or the lithosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere. It involves chemicals, and then it involves the cycle, right? It's recycled. It goes from reservoir through all these different things back to the reservoir. Okay, and so we're going to talk about these in 5 different parts: the reservoir of the chemical, the movement of the cycle, the causes of some environmental problems and disruptions. Spoiler alert: it's us. The effects of those disruptions, and then all just like a recap of all the chemical reactions involved. So this is our visual that we're going to use to help us understand the nitrogen cycle, right? And the reservoirs for the nitrogen cycle can be found in the atmosphere. Nitrogen is the most common element in our atmosphere, right? N2, it's just pure nitrogen. It makes up 78% of our atmosphere by weight. It exists as a diatomic molecule, which means it's got two atoms. But nitrogen is also present in the form of nitrogen oxides like NO and NO2, and then some trace amounts of ammonia as well. And then it also exists in our bodies of water as nitrate or nitrite compounds. And a large portion of those chemicals come from ground runoff, from fertilizers and pesticides and other industrial chemicals and things like that. Okay. We see nitrogen in the geosphere in organic matter, specifically from rotting plant and animal remains, and that will be in the form of ammonia or ammonium ions or nitrates and nitrites. Okay. And then in the biosphere, nitrogen is a key component of our body, right? It's central to amino acids. Hopefully, you remember that amino group, right? It's got an NH in there, bonded to those carbons. And amino acids are what make up our proteins and our DNA. And so nitrogen is a central element to a lot of this. I'm going to go close my camera out because I think it's about to get in the way of some text here in just a minute. And so you can see here we've got our reservoirs. We've got the nitrogen in the atmosphere, and then we've got the nitrates in the soil. Okay. So it turns out the nitrogen in the atmosphere cannot actually be used by plants. So plants just can't just breathe in that nitrogen the same way that we do oxygen and use it. So nitrogen has to be fixed, right? It goes through this process of being fixed so plants can use it. And so that fixation happens through bacteria or through the atmosphere or through industrialization, right? So nitrogen is just like the ingredients of a cake, right? You can serve cake ingredients to people, but they're probably not going to eat it, right? So we need to bake it, and so it can be enjoyed by others. Nitrogen is the same way. All the ingredients are there. We just can't eat it. We need to take advantage of different organisms and mechanisms around us to fix it or bake it, so that we can get this right. And so plants and animals rely on natural processes with nitrogen to react and make usable nitrogen compounds. One way is through the symbiotic nitrogen fixation with bacteria, right? And these bacteria live on the roots of peas, beans, alfalfa, and other legumes. And so here is a little graphic of what those things are, right? So lentils, peas, beans, soybeans, peanuts, chickpeas, stuff like that. These bacteria live on the inside of them, and you can see that's an active, healthy nodule where those bacteria are in there and they're taking atmospheric nitrogen and they are fixing it so that it can be used by plants and other creatures. Okay. Some other methods that are less common are atmospheric fixation. When lightning occurs, it can break that nitrogen apart just through sheer energy and cause it to bond with oxygen in the air to form those nitrates and nitrites that can be then dissolved in rain and then used through plants through that rain. We have combustion reactions in factories and power plants and automobiles that burn fossil fuels that contain nitrogen containing compounds. And then we have our industrial fixation where we have fertilizers and other fossil fuels being burned and used that contribute nitrogen to our reservoirs as well, right? And so here we have those three things kind of noted here. We have our legumes, and we have our atmospheric fixation and our industrial fixation that help to take that atmospheric nitrogen and make it usable by plants and animals. And so in this process, what happens as it's fixed? We have ammonification and nitrification. And so the ammonia can actually be really harmful to humans, right? We can't just breathe in ammonia, it can be toxic to us. So what happens is this ammonia gets fixed as well. And so that's through ammonification. We can see this NH3 here, this ammonia reacts with oxygen and some free electrons to produce NH2OH and water, right? And then what happens there is that then reacts further to produce these nitrites and nitrates that can be taken up by plants through the soil and then used to produce amino acids and proteins, which then animals get, and then we get, right? We eat plants and animals, and those animals that we eat plants, and so those legumes and the bacteria inside them fix the nitrogen that the plants take in, and then through our eating of those plants and then our eating of animals that eat those plants, that's how we get the nitrogen and the amino acids that we need to survive. Okay, so you can see that here as well. So we have our plant and animal waste and remains. Those go through bacterial decay to create ammonia. And then that ammonia can be fixed as well through bacteria to create nitrates that can then be used by plants to be eaten by us. Then when we want to undo this, right, we go through a process of denitrification, where then we have those nitrates that are broken down by fungi and other bacteria, and then that produces N2, which is atmospheric nitrogen. And so that starts the process all over again. So we take nitrogen in the atmosphere, we fix it, it produces either ammonia or nitrates directly. That ammonia that's produced is then made into nitrates through ammonification, and then it's used by plants and animals. The plants and the animals die, and then fungi and other bacteria denitrify it to put that nitrogen back into the atmosphere. And that is how we complete the nitrogen cycle. All right, you can see that here. So let's go through to the next little bit here. Some disruptions to the nitrogen cycle include industrial processes that fix nitrogen, urban and rural runoff, livestock ranching, sewage and septic tank waste and leaching, fossil fuel combustion, power plants that burn fossil fuels, and then deforestation and wildfires, right? And so you can see all of these things have become more and more common and have produced more and more nitrogen into our waterways and things like that. This is an older graph. I couldn't find anything newer. I apologize there. So some of the impacts of this, right, are that we have an increased global concentration of N2O, dinitrogen monoxide, which is a greenhouse gas. We talked about greenhouse gases in our oxygen cycle video, where that heat remains in on Earth and starts to raise the temperature of our planet. Right? We have increased concentrations of nitrogen monoxide that allow for more efficient formation of urban smog. If you remember from our oxygen cycle video, those nitrogen oxides react with those volatile chemicals in the air to produce ozone and other smog forming chemicals. And then we can get nitrogen saturation in our soil. We can have more nitrates and nitrites than our plants know what to do with, right? And if our plants can't use those, then they start to build up and they make their way into runoff water. And then that leads to those dead zones where we cannot have plant life or animal life in water, and it starts to disrupt the oxygen cycle as well, right? That's a process called eutrophication, and so a lot of times that will result in like these very thick layers of algae and green like hazardous life on top of of lakes and rivers and things like that, where no sunlight can get below. The plant life in that water cannot use all the nitrogen there. It eventually dies, and then all the animal life in there dies as well because it doesn't have the oxygen producing plants to take care of that. So, big problem for us here, and industry and farming are a large part of that. And so finally, then we just get to our important reactions. We have our atmospheric nitrogen being fixed. We have ammonification and nitrification, so that we can use those things. And then our denitrification as we end the cycle and start again with our atmospheric nitrogen there. Okay, so that is the nitrogen cycle. Use this information on your quiz, and good luck.